shared into the upcoming topics too. So amazing.
Great.
And yeah, good morning, everybody. The West Coasters aren't the only one who feels like 9 a.m. is a little bit early for a webinar, but I'm happy to be starting my day with y'all, and just want to get us started with doing a little grounding for a moment. So you might be on the computer, on the phone, might be multitasking, but just taking a second to land a little bit where you are and start arriving into this call. Noticing the light, the air, and your body breathing. Any sounds around you. And if there's a way to connect to the earth, either directly or just through sensing it, making that connection. Thanks. Well, it helps me arrive a little bit more. It's so, I spend a lot of time in little Zoom boxes at this point in my life. It's a funny way to exist. Good to remember we have bodies and exist in specific places. So thank you. And some of you started putting in introductions into the chat already, which is awesome. And would love to invite folks who haven't already to just share a little bit about who you are and where you're calling from. And also, if there's anything you want to share about how you came to live on the land that you currently live on, whether you moved for work or for love or for school, or you live where you're from. So my name is Jess Kelly. I'm so excited that I see 2 North Carolina folks in the chat box. Hello, Dallas and Juliana. I am in Central North Carolina in the Piedmont. I just moved back into Durham after some years of living rurally. The light is doing a shadowy thing. My apologies for that. But yeah, so I live in North Carolina. It's my home. It's where I'm from. I moved here with my family when I was about 10. And I'm so grateful for getting to live and organize and grow near my family also, near blood family and chosen family. Yeah, I know that appreciate you all sharing where you are and what you're up to. It's something that I think about with this generation generally being a lot more mobile and less rooted than prior generations, is just how it affects our sense of either investment or disposability in the communities and soil, both the kind of literal and metaphorical soil where we are. But we know, of course, that land holds memory. And so even if some of us have a propensity to forget, as is socially encouraged to do so, that the land remembers. So I just want to give appreciation to the land where you're each calling from, and appreciation to the Occaneechi tribe, who are the folks who steward the land that I currently occupy. And so I'm going to just share a little bit about resource generation, and then hopefully stop talking as soon as possible to start getting more from y'all. And so resource generation organizes young folks, which we define as people who are 18 to 35, who have access to wealth and or who come from class privilege, to be meaningfully involved in social change. And so The organization has been around for a little over 20 years and has helped politicize and radicalize young donors in that time. And so Resource Generation specifically is focusing on redistribution of land, wealth, and power, understanding that all three of those things have to shift dramatically in order to actualize a different version of society, because the mass hoarding of those three things, of land, wealth, and power in the States and internationally, doesn't get us where we want to go, doesn't get folks free. And so I've been on staff at Resource Generation for the last 4 years, managing political ed. And before that, I was doing anti-racist organizational development work and farming for 7 years. And so this was a sweet invitation to get to weave together some different parts of my heart in being on this call with you all. So I appreciate getting to share the time with you. And a question that I want to pose to you brilliant beings is, what would be made possible if land were distributed equitably? And so you can either unmute yourself and share verbally, which I would love to get to hear your voice, and or you can also put it in the chat box. What would be made possible if land were distributed equitably?
This is Dallas. I think that if land were distributed equitably, it's also early, we would see people being able to have what they need and a space to come home to after, for most of us, capitalism beats us up every day. I think that'd be very important.
Yeah, I love that, a space to come home to. Thank you, Dallas.
This is Melissa Madden from Ithaca. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Melissa.
Okay, thank you. As a cider maker, I'm making wild foraged fruit. So it is out of actually publicly accessible food. And I keep thinking how incredibly empowering it is to just go out and have access to food, which is really a gift in the Northeast with apples, and how much creativity and hope and feelings of beauty it inspires, which is very healing for me, and I think would be a beautiful thing if it was more accessible for everyone. Our public lands are very limited in the Northeast.
Yeah, I agree. More access to public food would be such an amazing gift, as it should be. Other folks? Maybe one more in the chat or verbally. I see someone put, equitable land distribution would allow for proper nutrition, enough usable land for each family community, a safer and more connected community where people would feel more responsible and protective of their own land. Yeah, thank you. Freedom of movement. Yeah, Resource Generation tends to focus more heavily on redistribution of wealth, which makes sense. That's that is needed in flow imminently and is overdue. And I really appreciate that. Equitable land distribution would allow for relationship healing by removing fears of scarcity. Yeah, thank you, Coralee. And the organization is trying to build up more framing around land redistribution and really leaning into that part of the mission statement, which is one of the parts that I'm getting to focus on. And so Resource Generation members have formed a land redistribution working group that has both like meets with just peer-to-peer support calls of folks who are actually in the process of trying to move land either back to Indigenous folks through land rematriations or doing land reparations back to Black folks. And it's really been deeply moving for me to get to hear the stories of folks like working with their difficult uncles to figure out restoring land access, or working, organizing with their family for years for a land return, or in some cases, like inheriting a property and then selling the property in order to be able to give a large donation to a Black or Indigenous farm or land project. And so those are some of the pieces of work that I'm getting to do, and I'm excited to share with you all about and hear how it's coming up in your work. And so to get us moving in that direction, we're gonna share some land stories with each other, because I think storytelling is a tool that is used by both intact communities and community organizing models. And so we're gonna just ground in our land story before getting to share stories about land redistribution. So taking a moment to think about this concept of land stories, I will say there's no right way. Something different might come out if you tell this story again tomorrow or later today, and just get to be curious about what comes up right now. And some guiding prompts, and I'll put them in the chat box also, but what has your family's relationship to land been like? What connections do you see between your access to land and access to resources? And who are the Indigenous people who historically or currently inhabit that land? I'll put that in the chat box. Again, these are just guiding prompts. You can add and adapt as wanted and needed. I'll give folks a second to reflect on that. And then I'm gonna model before we go into small groups. Okay. So I'm gonna do a version of my land story, which you certainly don't need to, I would certainly not advise, in fact, modeling after, but just to see it done before getting tossed in to sharing. So I would say I come from people who live really close to the land. My mom's side, there are a lot of farmers and farm workers, and my dad's side, there are a lot of food workers. So like I shared, I organize with young folks with wealth or class privilege, but that's not where I come from. I come from folks who never accumulated wealth, though through the Dawes Act and whiteness, my grandfather did accumulate some land that that he worked off of, and that I was born onto in southern Georgia, where my mom's family is. And it's there's been a real obliteration of the soil in that area. a lot of tobacco farming and cotton farming, and now GMO soy. And my mom left the land and was the first person in the family to leave the farm, the first person in her generation, since the land was acquired. And it meant that leaving the land meant we had a different exposure to poverty than we would have if we had stayed, because in that rural setting, folks traded and bartered and were less engaged in the economy than once you're in the city. And so I had a different experience because of not being on the land, both of being protected from some of the desolation and isolation, and also of having a different experience of what it meant to not have access to stable food. They had a large garden and home. And so when I started farming in my early 20s, it was like a returning to the land and getting to do it in a different way, really small scale agriculture, and with getting to like re-tend to that connection. And then I lived on land. And I should say the land in Georgia is, I believe, part of Creek Nation's land, which my grandmother was a part of, though the story I grew up with because of the way that whitewashing happens in the Southeast, and a flattening of history was just that she was Cherokee. And now, have lived on this land, this Occaneechi land, for the last 12 or so years. And I'm getting to know, as the climate changes, just trying to like keep updating my relationship and keep learning. Because it used to be that I could like tell when it was going to rain, and now it's sometimes really hard to tell. The sky is changing and the cues are changing. So anyway, that was 4 minutes, which is how long you will have to ramble and see what comes out of your mouth, what wants to be shared in this moment. And so I believe Elizabeth is going to break us into small groups, and you'll have, like I said, 4 minutes to share a version of your land story and start, and for some folks that story is like, I grew up with really no connection to the land. But you can find whatever is true for you and explore it. And then we will come back together.
So we'll break into 3 to 4 participants per room. Does that sound good?
Sure.
And then, so 4 minutes for each. So we'll do like a 15-minute breakout or so.
Great.
Okay.
And if you all can just keep time for yourself and for each other.
And so you'll be prompted to press a button to accept the invitation to the breakout room, and a minute before the breakout closes, it will give you it will start giving you a 60-second countdown, and then automatically bring you back to this main section. So so in between each of you, keeping time is a good idea. It obviously won't keep each 4-minute time. So, all right, here we go. All right, so you should have been given a prompt to end up in your breakout room. And if any of you do end up alone in a breakout room, which occasionally happens, I'll send you to a different one, but it's looking like we're good. Jess, you're in a breakout room with someone. Sorry, sometimes the breakout rooms are pretty dramatic and abrupt at closing, so hopefully you weren't too cut off. But I was told the breakout room with 4 people was done, so it seemed like hopefully everybody had some time to share, but I'll hand it back to Jess.
Okay, welcome back. How was it to share? How did that go? Folks can unmute themselves for chat. How was it to share and how was it to listen?
I'm going to say I was with, I'm sorry, Tara. I was going to say Tara again, Tara. And it's really pleasant to listen on conversations regarding the prompts we got, because I find that as a farmer, land work is extremely personal, and different people's personal relationships to most things is not really talked about unless you're friends with someone, and being intimate with someone in a way about where they find their rootedness or what their historic connection to rootedness or process of getting rooted right now is something very sacred. So I appreciate the time to do this at the top of the day with someone I've never met before that I can hopefully stay in touch with. I appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks, Dallas.
Hi, good morning, y'all. This is Tara Brown. Yeah, Dallas, it was really great talking to you. I'm so sorry I didn't realize the time, so Dallas actually didn't get to share much at all. But yeah, it was really a process, and really loved the prompts, and really kind of made me, like you were talking about at the beginning of this meeting, kind of ground myself in like where I've been. And you know, I've thought about it in the terms of, yes, I moved here for school, so I'm in Philadelphia right now, but like what has that process looked like in transition? What my family's relationship has looked like in the land, and what that transition process has looked like. It was very reflective, which was nice.
Yeah, appreciate that.
Shakita doesn't have a microphone, so just to share what she's typing in so everyone can hear. She says it is so comforting and uplifting to know that there are young adults all over that are interested in working towards caring for the land and equitable land distribution. Compassion fatigue is a real thing, so thanks for lifting me up.
It's such a real thing. Other folks, how was it to share and how was it to listen?
This is Molly. I would agree with Dallas that it was sort of an interesting and nice thing to start the day with this sort of very intimate conversation. I didn't really anticipate it being as intimate as then I felt it was as I was speaking. And also Coralee got cut off, even though we were only 2 people, we, I guess, had a lot to say. So, so sorry about that, Coralee. But yeah, I think it was really helpful for me personally. I don't know that I've been asked those questions, or I think I've thought about them myself, but haven't really delved deep into them and had to then articulate the answers to them. So that was helpful for me.
Great. Yeah, I don't know if this is a recurring theme for you all in the both in your own journeys and in the work that you do, but I'm really struck by how much belonging is a real core issue that comes up for a lot of us in organizing, and the ways that that comes up in terms of like, what am I trying to say? I think there can be a like gap or a hole that we're trying to figure out how to fill with each other. That part of that is relational, and part of that is about community building, and part of it, to me at least, for my disposition, is about connection to the land, and to non-human animals, as like what needs to go in that spot to help me kind of click into a deeper sense of belonging. So I appreciate you all taking the time to do some morning storytelling, and really agree that it's such a peculiar thing that we spend so much time with folks without dropping into some of these questions, and that it's the stories we're telling and not telling so deeply drive how we're showing up. And so it's a nice thing to just have the chance to say them directly. Is there anyone else who wants to share about what you noticed or how it was to share and listen? Okay, I'll keep us moving. So want to have some time now to chat about what are the models of people making choices around land access and land redistribution that inspire you. And it seems like maybe it's easier for us to share when we're in a slightly smaller group. So we'll break back up into, Elizabeth, you could make a call, maybe either two or three groups.
Sure. So more people per group. Is that what you're, okay. Yep.
And we'll just spend this time in small groups, getting to chat about this question of, and I'll put it in the chat box, what are models of people making choices around land access and land redistribution that inspire you? And again, this is a loose prompt. If there's something else that's on your heart that is more it for you right now, then go with that. But we'll get to talk through this and then hear some highlights from each other's groups.
Do you have a sense of how many minutes you want for the breakout?
Maybe check in 10 and see about 10 or 15.
Okay, sounds good.
Great, thank you.
All right. Yeah, a bunch of people aren't joining.
Hi, y'all. Welcome back. So I'm curious to hear what was something you learned in that conversation, or either a like example that you didn't know about before, or an example that you got to share about. Could also be a question that you're left with. And let's try passing it. So maybe if Melissa could start and then pass it to someone else. Melissa, are you there?
Yes. I would just feel like it's a big task. We had a great session. I thought it was with Natalie, Shakita, and Tara. Did I right? That was just the 4 of us. And we ended up talking actually a lot about dairy, but we spent some time also discussing a session that Groundswell had hosted, because Natalie and I are both local, with the Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust back, I think that was in October, where we talked about all the different options there are for the idea of reparations or rematriation. I shared my experience with the value added chain, like owning a cidery and a farm, and how appealing it was to me to add sort of a use tax to my cider, and the experience that I've had talking to people who I consider open-minded, who are still reacting very strongly to the word reparations, and thinking about how to introduce the other words that are possible into more regular conversation, like this use tax. So that was kind of a scattershot version, but I really enjoyed our conversation. It was lovely, and we decided we're going to take on Big Dairy.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Someone had to do it. And who do you want to pass it to, Melissa?
Are we going to pass it to the other people in our group? Because I would pass it to Tara or Natalie, or if Shakita wanted to type something in to follow up with what I said.
Sure, I can go ahead and add a little bit. And so just talking about what, like our own knowledge of organizations who are working in land access and like land redistribution. I think a couple of us within the group said like, this is why we were coming to that space, or this space here, to understand and learn more about those organizations that are doing that work. And so, yeah, just kind of just being really excited about finding this space in this group, and knowing that this is happening monthly. I just feel like I'm feeling really energized around that. So that's my addition.
Okay, Natalie or Shakita?
Hey, this is Natalie. Sorry, my office is being loud. I couldn't hear you for a second. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep, you sound
okay,
great.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about the difference between leveraging organizational support, so like through a land trust or through a nonprofit, versus taking a more grassroots approach, which is like a collaboration of, say, just a group of herbalists come together on some shared land and decide to support each other. So like looking at different models, both like structural or policy based with organizational support, and just folks getting together and using land and sharing it. Should I pass it?
Yeah.
I'm gonna pass it to Coralee, who I think is also in Philly. She's there.
Coralee, are you there?
I was muted. I was talking. Thank you for saying something. Yeah, so I think the thing that was really interesting that came out of our group was a question that Dallas asked towards the end of the time that we were meeting, about whether or not there were other white-led organizations that were like resource generation. And Jess and Elizabeth both had some good examples of sort of smaller individual efforts. But I don't know that we came up with, and please correct me if I missed something, that there were other sort of larger organizations doing similar work. And I feel like that was a nice thing to hear, and to recognize that model could potentially, or maybe should potentially be activated or brought forth in more locations. So it wasn't just one organization, or potentially grown. So I think that was a really important thing to call attention to.
Thanks, Coralee. And who do you want to pass it to?
I don't see a long list here. I'll pass it to Sarah Katz.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. We talked about some models mostly in New York, because I think 3 of us were in New York, including the Soul Fire Farm reparations map, the Black Farmer Fund, Northeast Farmers of Color, and their work of, which is very much in process of trying to acquire land and develop rematriation around it. The Finger Lakes Land and Reconciliation Working Group. And then someone knew of a project in Mississippi that was working on reclaiming land, but I didn't catch the name. I don't think we mentioned the name. Yeah, does anyone else want to add to what we talked about? Yeah, I could pass it to Molly.
Yeah, that's fine. I think that was a good kind of summary of like the initiatives and things that we talked about. I think one of the things that like always I just keep coming back to and trying to think about more is I believe Katie brought up in her work with the working group in the Finger Lakes region, the idea that I think a lot of this work is in process, and that trust and consent are at the heart of reconciliation, and that there's like a lot of deeper healing that needs to happen. I work with a land linking website, and we specifically were saying that like this work can't really happen through simply land linking, that there needs to be deeper relationships involved. And so I'm thinking about that and taking that away. And I guess with that, I'll pass it to Katie, maybe.
Hi. I think one other thing that we talked about a little bit was, I think Sarah, like your work in the Bronx in urban garden settings, and about the different kinds of like decision making, or governance, or whatever that happens, and or it can possibly happen in those settings, and things that we could learn from that. I forget, you said that they're mostly owned by maybe the city, but that they're empty lots, and that people are just coming together and figuring out how to make decisions about what they want to have happen on these pieces of land. And it's a whole different way of going about relating to each other in terms of decision making, which is, it's cool to think about. That's all. I'll pass it to Juliana. She was in our group also.
Hey, sorry, y'all.
Okay.
Computer is not being nice to me today. Yeah, and like in addition to that, I mean, I don't know, it just is helpful to hear about things that are happening in different parts of the country. I don't know, for me, it's really helpful to think about like the different strategies, because I feel like there can be like we need so many different kinds of strategy. It's not just like one strategy. We need multiple at many different levels. And I shared about an organization in Seattle that collects rent, which is like more of resource distribution rather than land, but it's kind of like tied to this idea of what land you live on. So it's called Real Rent Duwamish, and it's a Native organization that will collect rent from folks that are living in the Seattle area, living on Duwamish land. And it's something that I see, you know, a lot of people that I know contributing to it and like asking people to contribute. And so I hope that it's things like that will like only increase and further, you know, this distribution of resources. Yeah, I don't know if I have anything. I feel like y'all very well covered a conversation. So I don't have much to add. Was there one more group or was that it?
There were a few more of us from my group. Dallas or Elizabeth, do either you want to share?
So yeah, I'll pass to y'all. Jess, if you want to go, or I didn't hear who else was in your group. Sorry.
You're good. Thank you. Yes. We also talked about the land tax model, which I think more and more places are in process of launching, which I'm excited about, and about the the Soul Fire reparations map, and the land trust, using land trust as a model, which one that I didn't share, but will say now, is there's a group here called the Earthseed Land Cooperative that's a Black and Brown collaborative of farmers and land stewards who bought a large parcel and put some of that parcel into land trust easement to be able to get tax break on it and protect it from development. And just there's so many different ways of using land trust that I'm seeing folks do creative, use it as an intervention tactic, which I'm learning a lot from and appreciating. Dallas or Elizabeth, do either of you have other reflections from our group?
Yeah, just that the land tax model is new for me, so I'm excited to research that. And overall, this is I appreciate the debrief because it's given me a lot of things to think about for seeing more stuff happening in my region of North Carolina. I'm a big fan of Earthseed. I would like to create something similar on the Harriet Tubman Freedom Farm. So it's nice to hear about what other people are doing in other spaces in the country.
I think the only thing I would add was, which was mentioned in the first breakout too, is the Chester Ag Farm Project in Hudson Valley area. Is an interesting model that's somewhat new. And then also coming from Soul Fire and Knee Folk is I think it's called the spiritual use easements instead of conservation easements. Thinking about different types of easements that are based in other elements of land use. So I think if you Google that, you'll find some very minimal information about it, but it's a really interesting concept to think about. That's the only thing I would add, but thanks everyone.
Awesome. Yeah, I super appreciate this report back. I got to learn from hearing about new things, and I'm feeling the like expansiveness of, just that there's so much happening locally and nationally that I don't know about. And I'm so grateful for that. I hope that is always true, or I know it's always true, and it's a good reminder of it. So we just have a few minutes left. I want to see, does anyone have a, like, this is a question I came with that I would like the group to think on with me, or something specific that you're wanting to get out of this time before we close it out? Or maybe you didn't come with the question, but it's now the one you're sitting with. I'll give a minute to see. Okay, great. Well, thank you for spending this part of your morning together, and for sharing both your personal story and doing some reflecting on your connection with land, and for doing some collective remembering and sharing about different projects and models that we get to learn from and grow with. And Elizabeth just put the link to the eval in, and I'm also going to put my email. If there's anything you want to follow up with me about, please do. And know that I'm just so grateful to be in extended community with you all, and so appreciative for the work that you're each doing and the pieces that you're each holding of the whole. So thank you. Elizabeth, is there anything?
Thank you so much, Jess. Thanks everyone for your participation. The recording of this outside of the breakout groups will be posted to our blog in the next week or two. So feel free to stay tuned if you want to share it with others, and hopefully we'll see you again.
Okay. Take care.
Thank you.